working okay, then we will get started. There goes notification. We'll get started here in just a second, ladies and gentlemen. Hopefully. There we go. Let's listen to us. Okay, then we will get started. That sounds okay. There goes notification. I don't know. There we go. That's fixed. Now go to YouTube. Open up the YouTube app. Do a search for Theology Central. Okay, turn off the chat. Now go to YouTube. Get that fixed. All right, YouTube is now fixed. I think all the other platforms, I don't need to change anything. So we should be good to go here in just a minute, ladies and gentlemen. We should begin here in just a second. Should have probably started just a couple of minutes earlier. That's okay. It takes, now with the whole YouTube situation, now takes a while to get that all set up. I have to manually start the live stream for YouTube. Then I have to go to YouTube app. Then I have to search for Theology Central. Then I have to click on play. Then I have to go to settings. Then I have to turn off all the chat features. Or the live chat would be on and people saying whatever there, and I can't monitor it when I'm broadcasting. So it's of no value to have the chat on. And on YouTube, if anyone's going to say rude and just ridiculous things, it'll be on YouTube. So, but the live stream is there. All right, we will begin here in just a second. I think hopefully this goes well. Decent numbers for this morning. That's pretty good. And so far, all of them are from Texas. That's a good sign. All right, then let's do this. Let me get my intro queued up. All right. With all of that said, we go live in 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1.
Looking at our world from a theological perspective. This is the Theology Central Podcast, making theology central.
Good morning, everyone. I would typically do my normal introduction, but with the Sunday broadcast, I try not to give it such a podcast feel, but at the same time, it is a podcast. I mean, the reality is, any church, any pastor, if you upload audio content, if you just upload your sermons, and if there's an RSS feed attached, you're a podcaster. I know many churches and pastors like to say, these podcasters, and speak negatively of podcasters. But if you put your sermons online and there's an RSS feed, sorry to tell you, you're a podcaster. But there's podcast episodes, right? But see, every sermon is really a podcast episode. So does it even matter? So do I just say, good morning, everyone? It is Sunday, July the 20th, 2025. It is currently 10:04 a.m. Central Time, and I'm coming to you live from Abilene, Texas. Do I just go ahead and do my normal intro? It doesn't really matter. I think it's fun. It's fun to watch, and it's kind of funny to hear sometimes this division within certain elements of Christianity. There are those who just loathe what they refer to as the Christian podcasters because they're troublemakers and they criticize and they critique and they review, and pastors hate it and they almost are dismissive of it. They feel like in some cases, podcasters are taking people away from the local church or whatever other criticisms they offer. But then at the same time, they put their sermons online, which inevitably, if there's an RSS feed, makes them a podcaster. So I just find it funny how like So do we call it a podcast? Do we just call it a sermon? Do we call it a podcast? Do we call it a Bible study? It's just weird how some people don't like the term podcast or podcaster. And it's almost said in a derogatory way. But whatever we want to refer to this as, it's Sunday morning, and you know what that means. We're back in the book of Isaiah, chapter 44. So if you have a Bible, go ahead and open it up to Isaiah chapter 44, and we're going to continue our verse-by-verse study. We're going from Isaiah chapter 40 all the way to Isaiah chapter 55. We began this in October, I believe, of 2024. We're now July 20th, 2025. So in some ways, it feels like a long time, but I guess, since most of these episodes, most of the teaching has only occurred on Sundays, I think we're making, pretty good time. Obviously we could condense it and make it, do it in a typical sermon format, which is what most people want. But if we did it in a typical sermon format, well, then I think what we're saying is, this is the conclusion I've come to in all of these discussions. If you haven't been listening to the podcast this week, we've been talking a lot about hermeneutics. And the conclusion I've come to probably, I don't even know how many years it's been now, that basically people who want sermons don't want to actually understand the text, because the way sermons are structured, they're actually the enemy of biblical interpretation and biblical understanding. Sermons, by their very nature, they just strip away from actually digging into the text. I know some are really good at giving the appearance that in a sermon that they're digging into the text, but they're not. They're doing everything other than digging into the text. They're giving you a certain theological perspective. They're stripping away challenges and questions, and there's just so much wrong with the typical way sermons are done. So yesterday we had a discussion about hermeneutics versus homiletics. Hermeneutics is where you go and you learn how to actually interpret scripture. What are the principles of interpretation? How do you utilize these principles? But in many cases in Bible college or seminary, you can go from the hermeneutics class, walk out the door, go down the hallway 4 doors, walk into the homiletics class. And then when you get into the homiletics class, all of a sudden it's not so much about what does the text say. Now it's about how you take what the text supposedly say, but now you've got to present it in this particular way. And this particular way means stripping away all of that depth and all of that struggle and all of those questions and all of the difficulties that every text presents. But you've got to now present it in a way that will be engaging to the people. It will make them feel like they went to church and they got their 3 little points, and it's all about a performance. See, if you think about it, hermeneutics is about interpretation. Homiletics is about giving people a spiritual performance so that people leave feeling like they went to church, because people want to feel like they went to church. They don't want to feel like they studied the text. Now, they'll tell you they studied the text, but you go and listen to sermons over and over and over. They're the problem. So that conversation came about because I received an email with someone kind of putting forth is the problem, because I've been talking about all the hermeneutical problems with just, say, sermons on Isaiah 40 through 55. I'm not going to go back through that again. I mean, almost 150 sermons reviewed now, listened to, given to artificial intelligence to critique, all the different things we have done with about 150 sermons. Not one of them has even come close to handling Isaiah 40 through 55. Anything that you could even say is remotely accurate from a hermeneutical standpoint. Homiletically, the way they preach, many of you would probably go, "Oh, that's a great sermon, and I love it," even though it's an absolute abomination to understanding Isaiah 40 through 55. So someone asked, is the problem that people's hermeneutics are wrong, or is the problem found in the homiletics class, that pastors they've got to give the people a certain thing, so that takes away from them actually handling the text? I think it's kind of the lines are blurred there. I don't know really where the problem is. I think in some cases it has to be hermeneutical, but I think when you get to, I've got to preach a sermon, and you're in Isaiah 40 through 55, well, you know what's going to happen. The pastor has to now make it about the people. He's got to make it practical. He's got to make it engaging. He's got to make it about them. And once you get to Isaiah 40 through 55 and you're making it about the people in the pew, well, you've lost the plot because it's not about the people in the pew. It's about people in Babylonian captivity. So we've been working on all of this, and we're going to continue doing it in the most sermon structure possible. Now, I think it still maintains some level of a sermon structure, but I try to get as far away from that as possible because I try to get people into the text. Sermons almost require passive listening, right? Where you just sit and listen. I've always wanted it to be like, you've got a Bible there. Let's figure this out. So we're going to continue to work on that. So Isaiah chapter 44, we've done our observational outline. Check. We did that, right? We looked at Isaiah 44. In fact, let me verify something here. I probably should have checked this before we went live. Let me look here. Yes. The last Sunday we covered Isaiah 44, 1 through 5. Isaiah 44, 1 through 5. So today that brings us to Isaiah chapter 44, verses 6 through 8. I wanted to verify that because I can't remember. I don't know how long ago it was. We were working on Isaiah 40 through 55. And one week I covered, I don't remember, I think it was chapter 43. It may have been chapter 42. I covered a section. And the next week, I basically covered the exact same thing. And I didn't realize that, no, we should have advanced it. And so, well, I was afraid I just made that same mistake. But the good thing is I don't think nobody from the church reached out and said, I think that you covered the same thing. So there is that joke that is often said in around preachers, that you could probably preach the same sermon for a month, maybe even 2 months before anyone in your congregation would even catch on. Now, I hope that's not accurate, but if it is, it once again demonstrates that so much of what people do in church, it's just performative. It's just playing a little religious game. Nobody really cares what's preached. Nobody really cares. As long as it doesn't make them mad or go against what they think. They just want that sense of going through the motions. So I hope it's not the case, but I can guarantee you today we are advancing it. So Isaiah chapter 44, let's remind ourselves, let's read briefly verses 1 through 5, because that's what we covered last week. Isaiah 44, 1 through 5. Yet now hear, O Jacob, my servant, and Israel, whom I have chosen. Now, okay, there's a lot I could say about 44:1, but we won't. Well, I'll just read it again. Yet now hear, O Jacob, my servant, and Israel, whom I have chosen. Thus saith the Lord that made thee and formed thee from the womb, which will help thee. Fear not, O Jacob, my servant, and thou Jeshurun, whom I have chosen. And we went a whole study on Jeshurun, so hopefully that was beneficial. Verse 3, for I will pour water upon him that is thirsty and floods upon the dry ground. I will pour my spirit upon thy seed and my blessings upon thine offspring. Please remember that when the text says, for I will pour water upon him that is thirsty, that is not about infant baptism. That's not about water baptism. Has not a thing to do with that. And people who try to draw that correlation, I have major issues with because, well, this is about people in Babylonian captivity. Okay, verse 4, and they shall spring up as among the grass, as willows by the water courses. This is referring to the offspring of those who are in Babylonian captivity. This is not about you being baptized and God's going to do something with the offspring through infant baptism or any of the other things I've heard in sermons. Verse 5, one shall say, I am the Lord's, and another shall call himself by the name of Jacob, and another shall subscribe with his hand unto the Lord, and surname himself by the name of Israel. So that's what we covered last week. I'm not going to go back and review everything. Hopefully you remember some of it. I'll give kind of a textual context. Well, I'll remind you a little bit about what's here, but I wanted you to hear it. So that brings us today for this hour, verses 6 through 8. And we read in verse 6, thus saith the Lord. All right, so you have thus saith the Lord in verse 2, and then verse 6, thus saith the Lord. I think in some ways that's a good way to, hey, it's like a new statement. God has spoken. Now, thus saith the Lord. Now he speaks again. Thus saith the Lord, the King of Israel and his Redeemer, the Lord of hosts. I am the first and the last, and beside me there is no God. And who as I shall call and shall declare it, and set it in order for me, since I appointed the ancient people and the things that are coming and shall come, and let them show unto them. Fear ye not, neither be afraid. Have not I told thee from that time, and have declared it? Ye are even my witnesses. Is there a God beside me? Yea, there is no God. I know not any. Now, if you look at verses 1 through 5, if you look at the verses 6 through 8, I think the one thing you should be able to determine here is it's not really that complicated. There's nothing complicated really here. There's nothing convoluted here. There's a lot we could dig into. So let me make it very clear. It's not complicated. It's not convoluted. Doesn't mean that it's not deep and there's not lots to be explored and a lot to be studied. There are plenty, and there's lots of little side things we could pursue, and maybe we'll come back and pursue at least some of them. For example, that phrase, the first and last, there's a lot of things you can do with that phrase that are very, very important and very significant. And we've talked about that in the past, but we're not going to dive into that right now. So there's plenty here to expound and to expand on. But from just a simple, straightforward reading, it should not be that complicated. It should not be that convoluted. But it still amazes me that when you read Isaiah 44, 1 through 8, what you find, or even 6, well, we'll just go 1 through 8. Again, you find sermons on infant baptism, sermons on, the children receiving the mark of the covenant, and then the benefits they get from it, like all kinds of just, I don't even know what. When it says, you shall be my witnesses, entire sermons about you being a witness. What is that? None of that has anything to do with Isaiah 44, 1 through 8. None of those things literally has anything to do with the text. So it's not convoluted. It's not complicated. But somehow the church in 2,000 years has made it complicated and convoluted. And that's so very frustrating. So it's pretty simple, pretty straightforward. I don't know how fast we'll go through this, but we'll see where we can go. Now, 44, 6 through 8, I could say, do you remember what we called this in our observational outline? But I'm not going to put you on the spot. But if we just read those verses, I think you should be able to at least summarize what is happening here, right? I mean, I think you should be able to. I mean, you don't even really need a lot of hermeneutical skill. Thus saith the Lord, the King of Israel and his Redeemer, the Lord of hosts. I am the first, I am the last, and beside me there is no God. And then look at the end of verse 8. There is no God, I know not any. I think you're getting the idea of what's being emphasized here, right? This seems to be showing that God, there is only one true God. You can show how God is exclusive. God is one. We see his sovereignty. We see his uniqueness. Right? Is that a good word for it? His exclusivity, his uniqueness. I don't think it's complicated to be able to see that. And why is that? Again, I know sometimes I feel like when you go through Isaiah 40 through 55, you have to say the same things 50,000 times. But considering how many sermons skip these things, I think it has to be discussed. Within its historical context, why would God once again take the time to speak to those in Babylonian captivity and try to explain his exclusivity, his uniqueness? Why would God take the time to do that? Because what is the major temptation these people in Babylonian captivity are facing? Well, you could argue discouragement, despondency, depression, frustration, bitterness, anger. I mean, there's a lot of those things, a lot of emotional feelings about being in Babylonian captivity, and they've been there a very long time. People have been born there and died there. So you could definitely say that would be a major temptation, right? I don't know if it's the most, but if you want to just look at it that way, they would have lots of emotions that they would be dealing with. I think that's fair to say. But I think the second one, and maybe this is the most important one, is they would be tempted by the Babylonian religious system, their idolatry, right? It was Babylon who destroyed the temple. It was Babylon who carried the people into captivity, which from that culture at that time, that would show the Babylonian God is greater than the God of Israel. That the gods of plural, the gods of Babylon, they have some claim of exclusivity. They have some claim of uniqueness. They have some claim of sovereignty. They have some claim of power. So throughout these words of comfort given to those in Babylonian captivity, they have to be reminded over and over and over and over again, no, the God of Israel is supreme. The God of Israel is unique. The God of Israel is one. These idols are not gods. They are made by your hands. They cannot help you. Don't look to them. So I think when you put it in that context, it makes perfect sense. So if we wanted to get something practical, I think when you look at life, you have two major temptations, right, that face us, right? First, you just have the everyday circumstances of life, the difficulties in life, the pain, the suffering, the tragedy in life, which can lead to despondency, depression, anxiety, worry, frustration. You just name all of the emotional things that you can be impacted by life. Well, those in Babylonian captivity were facing life circumstances that could give them worry, anxiety, fear, concern, depression, discouragement, bitterness. Life is filled with those things, right? So that's a major issue everyone has to deal with. And then, of course, we always have idolatry is everywhere. In fact, the famous line is that the human heart is an idol factory. And I don't like that because that has the human heart producing idols. I think the human heart is the idol. The human heart idolizes itself. The human heart worships itself. We are the idol. We bow before ourselves. We worship self, serve self, and anything that doesn't go our way leads to the negative emotions. And we could get into a whole lengthy discussion about that. But those are two things they are facing. And God is giving them words of comfort to try to help them with their practical situation. I mean, this entire section is called the Book of Consolation or the Book of Comfort. And he's saying, you have not been abandoned. You have not been forgotten. I am going to keep my promises. Now, it may not make them immediately happy considering when they hear these words, but at some point, there's going to be some relief, all right? So there's the practical response to them. And then when it comes to the idolatry part, it's like, no. Don't look here. Don't look there. Look to me, all right? So right there, you can kind of get a basic idea on what's going on in this section, okay? So if we put Isaiah 44, 6-8 now in some kind of textual context, I think it's clear to say, obviously, this section follows verses 1-5. That makes perfect sense. And verse 1-5, what was the major emphasis here? There is a promise of the restoration to Israel. They're going to be restored. God is going to do something. He's going to pour water upon him that is thirsty and floods upon dry ground. And I will pour my spirit upon thy seed and they shall spring up. And so this is a restoration, the regathering of Israel. And we talked about how some of this could possibly pointing to not only the historical fulfillment of coming out of Babylonian captivity, but maybe even a future regathering and restoration of Israel. And we talked about how that's mentioned in the New Covenant. And we talked about all of that. All right. Now, starting at verse 6-8, God is now going to reassert again, he's going to restate again his identity, his uniqueness as the only God. He's going to draw his attention to his role as Redeemer, as King, and the first and the last. So when you look at 6-8, how does God identify himself? Well, it doesn't take a lot. Thus says the Lord. So you have Lord, capital Lord, right? Does that not point us to the covenant name of God, right? Jehovah, Yahweh, depending on that whole never-ending debate, right? Is this not his covenantal name, the self-existing one? All right, there's significance here. King of Israel, clearly that's a connection to Israel, right? Right, that's to the nation. And his Redeemer, the Lord of hosts. We got Redeemer, we got Lord of hosts. He goes, this entire section is about clearly identifying himself. And then he goes, I am the first and I am the last, and beside me there is no God. All of verse 6, we could just, I could give it as an assignment and say, okay, I'll see you in about 30 minutes. Just go through each one of those titles. What does each one mean? What is the emphasis of each one? And what is significant about these being emphasized to those in Babylonian captivity? In light of those two major sources of temptation, their circumstances making them tired, discouraged, despondent, frustrated, irritated, upset, worry, anxiety. And then God comes along and says, thus saith the Lord, the Lord. If that points to the covenant that he made with them, his kind of covenantal name, well, then that's to give them some kind of assurance. The King of Israel. No, you have a king. It's me. It doesn't matter what else is going on, irregardless of your circumstances, right? And his Redeemer, the first and the last. Beside me, there is no God. All of that is to help them with their circumstances, and it's to help them not turn to the idolatry of Babylon. So all of the names address these two sources of, we'll call it temptation or, things that could greatly impact them. I think it makes sense. All right. And he goes through all of those things, giving his identity, giving his uniqueness, because he's doing this in contrast to the false gods that are going to be mocked in verses 9 through 20. Because when you get to verse 9, look what it says. They that make a graven image are all of them vanity. So he establishes his identity, his uniqueness, right? His exclusivity. He establishes all of that in 6 through 8, which sets the stage for verses 9 through 20, where it goes massively after the foolishness of idolatry. In fact, in a very almost satirical, mocking kind of way. So this flows perfectly from the promise of restoration, identifying, hey, I'm promising you restoration, but do not look to the gods of Babylon. And in the meantime, don't become so discouraged and despondent because I am God. I mean, it fits all perfectly. And then this sets everything up for what comes after. So you could argue that this is not just a theological affirmation. It's not, hey, we could see it as a theological affirmation. Like if you're in theology class, all right, we're going to look at theology proper, and we're going to look at how God identifies himself today in class. And your text is Isaiah 44, verse 6. All right, class, work on how God has identified himself. I want you to be able to explain the significance, the theological depth of each one of these titles. And I don't want you to have this done in the next 2 hours. Go, right? But it's more than a theological affirmation. Again, I think it's almost as it's an argument. It's a polemic, if we want to use that term. It's a direct rebuttal to the Babylonian polytheism. That's a good way to say it. It's a direct rebuttal to the Babylonian idolatrous system, if you want to say it that way. It's obviously polytheistic. They has multiple gods. It's a direct rebuttal to idolatry itself. It is being spoken directly to exiles that are immersed in this polytheistic system. And just think, they are immersed in a polytheistic system while being very possibly discouraged, despondent, and wanting hope, help, wanting something. So you put the two concepts together, they're vulnerable, but the entire section is to offer words of comfort to them. All right. If we kind of look at the structure of Isaiah 44, 6 through 8, I mean, you've got 3 verses. So do we break this into kind of 3 parts? Do we kind of break this into 3 parts? 6 through 8? I think we could. I mean, because it's 3 verses, it kind of it seems like it feels like it's easy to break it into 3 parts. Verse 6, do we call this a declaration of divine identity? I think so. I think that works. He's declaring his identity. God is declaring his divine identity. You got King, Redeemer, Lord of Hosts, Lord. You've got all the different titles there. I am the first and I am the last, and beside me there is no God. So I think you could say that verse 6 is a declaration of divine identity. You could argue there are specific titles, and then maybe we see it, then there are specific affirmations. I am the first and the last. Or do we say I'm the first and the last as a title? Is it an affirmation or is it a title? In some ways, I am the first and the last, I think almost serves as a title in some ways. And beside me, there is no God. That is the clear affirmation. The affirmation in 6 through 8 is simple. How would we say it? Beside me, there is no God. I think that's, in fact, it's repeated. Verse 6, let's see. Beside me, there is no God. And verse 8, there is no God. I know not any. Okay, it's the same concept, just stated slightly different. But the idea is the affirmation here in verse 6, and I think in the affirmation through verses 6 to 8, if we want to summarize one affirmation, beside me, there is no God. Right? But so verse 6 is a declaration of divine identity. And what do we have in verse 7? And who, as I, shall call and shall declare it and set it in order for me, since I appointed the ancient people and the things that are coming and shall come, let them show unto me. I think verse 6 is a declaration of divine identity. I think verse 7, this is a challenge to any rival. Who is like me? It's kind of a rhetorical, right? It's not, there's no real answer. The answer is no one. I guess the answer is no one. No one can really answer the question because there is no one like God. What is emphasized here? And who as I shall call and shall declare it and set it in order for me, since I appointed the ancient people and the things that are coming and shall come and let them show unto me. I think it's kind of an emphasis, maybe a little bit on foreknowledge, right? And the proclamation of future events. Maybe there's also kind of an emphasis on controlling everything that happens. All right. So verse 6, we have a declaration of divine identity. Verse 7, a challenge to rivals. And what do we have in verse 8? Fear ye not, neither be afraid. Now, I told you there was 2 major temptations. Their emotional situation, right? And they did the temptation of idolatry, right? So you could say emotional and spiritual, right? There's 2 the emotional is their circumstances can make them discouraged. The spiritual is the idolatry. So he sets, and what's the answer to both? Well, there's only one true God, right? Look to him. But here, then he gets very specific in verse 8. He's addressing the idolatry system here. And then in verse 8, what does he say? Fear ye not, neither be afraid. That's a direct address to the emotional aspect. That goes directly to that. So we could say verse 6 is a declaration of divine identity. Verse 7 is a challenge to rivals. And verse 8 is the command to fear not. It's a command to fear not. All right? And it's kind of, think of it this way. It's a divine assurance. And if you notice, ye are even my witnesses. Who is he referring? He's referring to those in Babylonian captivity. He's referring to Israel. You are my witnesses of my divine identity in practice. You've seen me act as king and sovereign. You know all of this about me. And it's not about us specifically. It's about them. And then how does it end? Basically, is there a God besides me? No, there is no God. I know not any. It ends with the exclusivity of God, the uniqueness of God, the sovereignty of God. So we have verse 6, the declaration of divine identity. Verse 7, a challenge to rivals. And verse 8, well, a command to fear not. Or you could kind of even break this into really, there's two issues being addressed: their emotional state and their spiritual state. And what's the answer to both? God's divine identity. His divine identity takes care of the spiritual issue because there is no God, and his divine identity is what gives them specifically hope to fear not, because he is God. He is their covenant God. In fact, I'm gonna verify something here. I'm gonna open up the Blue Letter Bible app. Hang on. I'm just gonna verify something because I did not put this in my notes. Okay, hang on. Where is it? I'm gonna go to verse 6. Yes, okay, here. You know this. I mean, you know the word.
Strong's H 3068. Yehovah. Yehovah.
Yehovah. Now, Yehovah is used 6,519 times, as you probably already know that. Yehovah, self-existent or eternal. Yehovah, the Jewish national name of God. All right. Jehovah, the existing one, self-existing one. He exists and we have no impact on his existence. It's the proper name of the one true God. It's unpronounced except with the vowel pointings of, right? So, but just the Jewish national name of God. It doesn't specifically mention the covenant name of God, but it's their God. It's their God, the God of Israel, the one. And in fact, if you go back, he's the God of Israel who did what? Look at verse 1 of chapter 44. Yet now hear, O Jacob, my servant, and Israel, whom I have chosen. I have made thee. I have formed thee. So this is just once again reminding them, I am your God. I am the God of this nation. So it's to help them not only with their spiritual issue, but with the emotional issue as well. All right. So there's kind of we'll call that the structure and the flow. Verse 6, declaration of divine identity. I think that's really key. Verse 7 is the challenge to the rivals. And verse 8 is a command to fear not. So if you can think about it, it gives you the answer to the two temptations. Verse 6 really gives you the answer. God's identity is the answer to their emotional temptation and their spiritual temptation. But it's all found in God's identity. And God's identity is he is exclusively God. He is uniquely God. He is sovereign. And there is no other God anywhere you can look. There we go. That, in some ways we could be done. There we go. We're done. I'm applauding myself. Now, we're not done, but we could be. I mean, because that really breaks it down. All right, now, if we try to go a little bit more into greater detail, let's kind of go now a little bit verse by verse. Let's look at verse 6 alone. We've already broken these down, doing a little bit of repetition so that it will hopefully stick with you. Thus saith the Lord, the King of Israel and his Redeemer, the Lord of hosts, I am the first, I am the last, and beside me there is no God. King of Israel. This is a rare phrase in the prophets. It emphasizes God's royal rule over his people. Despite exile, earthly kings have failed. Yahweh remains king. So it's the idea, he is Lord, the self-existing one. In other words, your circumstances, your situation does not change the fact that I am God because I am the self-existing one. I'm the eternal one. And I am your God, Israel. It's another way of saying, because it's the Jewish national God in a sense that way. It's very much tied to Israel as a nation. So he starts off with, thus saith the Lord. All right. So there's that. Then the King of Israel is clearly like, hey, I'm still your king. Your kings may have been defeated. You may have been drug off into captivity. Your kings may have done this, but you still have a king. right? You can look to earthly kings. They're going to let you down. They're going to fail you. They may be good one day. They may be bad the next day, because overall they're all bad, because there's no one good. There's no not one, because we're all sinners. But I remain your king. Then it says, thus saith the Lord, the King of Israel and his Redeemer. And then this, Yahweh is both, if you can think about it this way, or Jehovah, Yahweh, however you would like to say it, is both King and Redeemer. This kind of echoes the Exodus, but now it's applied to the future deliverance from Babylon. I am your King and I am your Redeemer. I will be the one to redeem you. You can't redeem yourself. The gods of Babylon are not going to redeem you. You cannot redeem yourself. No matter how depressed or discouraged you get, no matter how much effort you cannot redeem yourself. I'm going to be the one to redeem you. I am the first and the last. Right? Now we could go with the Lord of Hosts. In fact, if I go back here, I don't know how it's broken down into the Hebrew. Let me look here. The Lord of Hosts is okay. If we kind of break this down, it's this Hebrew word, the Lord of Hosts. Host.
Strong's H 6635. Sava. Sava.
Sava is used 485 times. It refers to that which goes forth: army, war, warfare, host, army, host of organized army, host of angels, of sun, moon, and stars, of whole creation, war, warfare, service. In other words, he's the Lord, the God of, everything. He's the God of the host. He's the God of armies. There's a lot of different ways that could possibly be applicable. In other words, God is the one ultimately in charge. So it doesn't matter how strong the Babylonians are. He's the Lord of hosts. He's the Lord of everything. All right. So once again, it's kind of offering some comfort. Then I am the first and the last, a statement of eternal sovereignty. Now we could break. I have a lot of notes here, but I'm going to skip a lot of my notes because I want us to do we'll make it our own personal side study. We'll work on that phrase here. All right. Beside me, there is no God. This is absolute monotheistic, monotheism. This is being spoken in a polytheistic context, but it's speaking monotheism. Polytheism is the dominant viewpoint, and this is straight up monotheism, all right? This is a direct contradiction of the entire Babylonian religious culture, all right? That I cannot stress that enough. So we'll do this for time's sake. That phrase, I am the first and the last, what I would challenge you to do is find everywhere in the Bible where I am the first and the last, that concept is either spoken as explicitly as I am the first and the last, or it's some kind of modification of that phrase, some version of that phrase, and find every place. And we'll do some work on it, right? Because this is very, very, very important. It's going to show up in the book of Revelation. And I think it's very important because it can help prove the deity of Christ, right? And the first and the last is also something that can be utilized when dealing with Jehovah's Witnesses when they try to argue that Christ is a God versus, the God. Okay, so we can get into a whole discussion about that. All right, and we'll work on that again. So if you kind of want to know the theological emphasis in verse 6 here, look, if they look at it from an earthly perspective, like if you're in Babylonian captivity, there are many powers competing, right? The power of emotion, the power of a polytheistic religious system. But from a theological perspective, there are not many powers competing. There's only one. And I think this is the foundation to understanding God within this context. Look, from an earthly perspective, come on, let's just be honest. From an earthly perspective, I can't speak for you because you may give church talk. I hate church talk. So from an earthly perspective, I'd be like, look, if there is one God, this God is useless. This God is powerless. This God is not doing anything. We're in Babylonian captivity. We're suffering. People have been born here, died here. What is going on? And there's all these other gods. So how do I even know these gods are different than the true God? Like from an earthly perspective, you could have a lot to say, and there would be lots of powerful things pulling at your emotions and your worldview and the way you think. But from a theological perspective, God is like, no. Okay, there is only one God, the Lord, the King of Israel, his Redeemer, the Lord of hosts, the first and the last. Beside me, there is no God. Once again, this demonstrates theological truth remains true irregardless of the religious culture you find or the emotional state you find yourself. Your emotional state and the religious world in which you find yourself does not change the ultimate truth about God. Now, it may change how you perceive that truth. It may change how you feel about that truth, but it's not changed. God is the self-existing one. He exists above and beyond your emotion, feelings, or thoughts. And Israel needs to hear this in their context. There's verse 6, verse 7. And who, as I, shall call and shall declare it, and set it in order for me, since I appointed the ancient people and the things that are coming and shall come, let them show unto them. Now, again, this is kind of somewhat of a rhetorical question. God dares any so-called deity to match his acts of sovereignty, especially in foretelling and ordaining history. Hey, if there's any God who can foretell what's going to happen and can ordain what is going to happen, then step up to the plate. Here's your chance. And none of the gods of Babylon are going to step up because, well, they don't speak. Okay, because, and we can get into a whole discussion about it. But yes, I mean, from a practical truth perspective, they're inanimate objects created by man, right? Now, I know they do a certain ritual and think that the God becomes alive, and we can talk all about that. But you get the basic concept being used here, right? Now, on one hand, it's something that you may want to celebrate. You're right. God is sovereign. God is the one who foretells. God is the one that ordains everything that comes to pass. Now, just remember, as sometimes that can be very comforting, that can also be very painful. All right. Now, Christians don't like the negative side of this. People get very mad when I give the negative side. If God ordains history, then you got to think about all the things that entails. Now, what we try to do is God ordains positive history, and on negative history, we get God off the hook, but there's no getting God off the hook. If he is sovereign, if he ordains what comes to pass. Child molestation, rape. You say, well, no, God didn't ordain that. Okay, well then if God doesn't ordain it, then at the very least, he knew it was going to happen. You can't get around that, and he did nothing to prevent it. But God steps in and changes history. And so, that gets you into some philosophical drama that nobody wants to deal with, but it's something you have to deal with to some level. But right here, we won't dig more into it, but just note that, all right? If we continue reading verse 7. And who as I shall call and shall declare it and set it in order for me, since I appointed the ancient people and the things that are coming and shall come, let them show unto them. I mean, basically saying I appointed basically everything that has occurred. Basically, it's like, since I appointed the ancient people, this is kind of likely a reference to probably God's electing of Israel, which we see in verse 1 and 2 of the same chapter. And we see him choosing choosing Israel. We see him obviously choosing Abraham. We see him choosing, in a sense, the patriarchs. I appointed the ancient people, and I appointed the things that are coming. God extends not just backwards into history, but it extends into the future events, especially deliverance and restoration. In other words, God is saying, I chose the ancient people. I ordained them of the past, and I know and am ordaining what's coming in the future. Now, for those in Babylonian captivity, this is great comfort, right? Because what does it do? I mean, look at those words. And who is I shall call and shall declare it and set it in order for me, since I appointed the ancient people, that's the past, and appointed the things that are coming, that's the future, and shall come, that's even further into the future, let them show unto me. If there's any other gods that can do this, well, none of the other gods can speak, right? So this shows Israel, hey guys, you're in Babylonian captivity. Your life is falling apart. Everything is hopeless, but just wait. Remember, I chose you in the past. That's Isaiah 44, verse 1 and verse 2. I chose you, formed you, created you, right? I ordained everything that comes to pass, and I'm going to ordain and choose the future based on the fact that I chose you. This is to bring them some words of comfort. Now, when you try to apply it to your life, just remember, though, it's a double-edged sword. You can find comfort in it, but also it's going to lead you to major struggles depending on what you've suffered in your life. So I guess the key I hear is basically this just shows God's authority. God knows he can declare the past, the present, and the future. And he can do this unlike the idols. It is the God declares the end from the beginning. I think we see that, I believe, hang on, I don't want to misquote this. Yeah, Isaiah 46:10, declaring the end from the beginning and from ancient times the things that are not yet done, saying, my counsel shall stand and I will do all my pleasure. This is massively emphasizing God's complete and total sovereignty. He declares what's going to happen, and what he wants to happen is going to happen. All right, now go back to chapter 44. Now we come to verse 8. Isaiah 44, verse 8. Fear ye not, neither be afraid. Have not I told thee from that time and have declared it? Ye are even my witnesses. Is there a God beside me? Yea, there is no God, I know not. Now, this is the fear not part. Fear ye not. This is a repeated refrain throughout Isaiah 40 through 55. We see it numerous times. And why are they told to fear not? Why are they told to fear not? Because these are words of comfort to people who are facing what two temptations, class? The emotional and the spiritual. The emotional is they're filled with worry, anxiety, pain, bitterness, despair, despondency. There's the emotional. And so, hey, don't fear don't fear the Babylonian religious system and their idols and their gods. And what is this assurance grounded in? It's grounded in God's identity, his character, his sovereignty. Ye are even my witnesses. Israel, throughout their history, they have evidenced God's uniqueness, his exclusivity, his sovereignty, his power. They have been witnesses to it over and over and over again. Is there a God beside me? I know not any. The omniscient God declares that no other deity exists, not even in potential. This is not ignorance, but this is divine certainty. This is not being said because, they think there's no other God. This is being like a divine certainty. This is God declaring there is not any other God. I don't know of any, and he's omniscient. He's all-knowing. So this is divine certainty. There are no other gods. God makes the declaration, not us. God makes the declaration. So what is the practical benefit of verses 6 to 8 for the people in Babylonian captivity? What it is telling them is comfort. I mean, this is the book of consolation, the book of comfort. Comfort is rooted not in a subjective experience, but in the objective reality of God's uniqueness and unchanging word. For those in Babylonian captivity, if they want comfort, it's not going to be found in some subjective experience. It's not going to be found based off their experience, their feelings, their emotions. It's not going to be found in the Babylonian polytheistic system. Comfort is going to be found in the objective reality of God's uniqueness and unchanging word. Now, for you and I, the only thing I can say to you is we've got to be very careful what we do with this, right? Because on one hand, we say, well, see, my comfort is not found in my subjective experience or my emotional experience. And I would agree. Comfort found in your experience only lasts when the experience is positive. But when things go bad, then you're going to become very disillusioned, despondent, discouraged, and want to give up and say, forget all of this. Right? So I can say, look to God. But I want to make this very clear. You can look to God and you can cling to God. Does not mean your practical experience is going to get better or change or even have any hope of getting better. It could actually get worse, more pain, more suffering, more death, more tears, more anxiety, and more worry. You have to acknowledge that, because if you just come to church to hear everything's going to get better tomorrow, you're out of your ever-living mind. It doesn't work that way. But here is the objective reality. Here's the objective reality for you and I. Just as God chose and created Israel, well, as Christians, we are God's elect. We are God's chosen. He has chosen and elected us. Just as Israel suffered over and over and over and over and over and over, we live in a fallen world that groans, waiting for the day of redemption, and we suffer, and there's pain, and there's anxiety, and there's worry, and there is no guarantee in Scripture that God is going to do anything to fix that for you. There is not one, but He does promise, just as He promised Israel, that there would come a day that they would be redeemed from their Babylonian captivity. And then He promised there would come a day where they would be regathered, restored, regenerated. He would give them a new heart. That has not yet occurred yet. They're still waiting. But He gives them an ultimate promise. Well, God for us promises that He will redeem us now from the penalty of our sin and condemnation. Amen. Which He has. By faith, His righteousness is declared unto us, or is imputed unto us. We are declared to be that which we are not. So He saves us from our condemnation, our guilt, and our shame. That's right now. He is our Redeemer. He is our King. We have been translated from the kingdom of darkness into the kingdom of light. So we are now currently saved, and our position, we are seated with Christ in heavenly places. Those are objective realities. Our subjective experience does not change my salvation, that I'm seated at the right hand of the Father in Christ, that I'm declared righteous. All of those are objective realities. My subjective experience, I'm still a sinner, fall, pain, suffering, worry, anxiety, all of those things. But just as Israel is promised an ultimate restoration, we are promised there will come a day, there will be no more pain, no more suffering, and no more death. That is the ultimate thing. So Israel parallels our experience. We're in captivity. We've talked about this over and over. We're in our own form of Babylonian captivity, where there's pain and there's suffering and death. And the hope of deliverance is far into the future. It may come when you die and then you enter into glory. It may come when Christ returns, but it's not for now. But God is still our Redeemer. He will redeem us. He will deliver us, just like He ultimately delivered Israel. But even after their initial deliverance from Babylonian captivity, it wasn't the true deliverance they're looking for, which is the ultimate restoration. So comfort, you can find some level of comfort in subjective experience if you can find the right experience in the right situation. You can find it, but you know that whatever that experience is, it's subjective in the sense that it's not lasting and it's ever changing. We have to look to the objective reality of who God is and His unchanging word of what He will do. Just don't take what He will do and make it sound like He's going to do it today or tomorrow in your particular situation. Now, the last part here, because we're right at the top of the hour. I'm just going to go through this quickly. I'm not going to, I'm just going to go straight with my notes here. I'm not going to be able to offer any real commentary here, but I want to just think of the historical and theological implications. Number one, the context of the exile. They were surrounded by Babylonian idolatry. They were surrounded by Babylonian idol worship. They were surrounded, in a sense, by an imperial theology. Israel needed to hear this almost as kind of a counter idea, almost a counter liturgy in a sense, right? It's a reassertion of who their God truly is. They needed to be reminded of who their God is. It clearly is a polemic against idolatry. This is an opening attack and a broader anti-idolatry discourse that's going to go all the way down to verse 20. This establishes God's exclusive claims over against man-made images. This is kind of a foundation of biblical monotheism, as Isaiah 44, 6-8 kind of stands at the heart of Old Testament monotheism. It prefigures New Testament declaration of Christ's deity and the we can get into a discussion about the Godhead, but I won't get into that right now. The indivisible, I was going to get into the indivisibility of the Godhead, but we won't get into that right now. And I think, again, the context here is they're facing two major temptations, the emotional and the spiritual, all right? I've got more here, but I won't get into that. Now, the hermeneutical challenges, if there are any, I guess there's the misappropriation of "you are my witnesses." Many sermons wrongly generalize this to mean all believers today without any context. But in the passage, the witness refers to Israel's unique role in history, both failed and promised. Israel has a unique role in history. They literally witnessed God do things that nobody else has ever seen before, all right? And I think some people will read the words "fear not" as some generic comfort. These words are not an abstract motivational slogan. They are anchored in God's acts and history, particularly within Israel's covenant relationship and their exile redemptive narrative. So you got to be very careful to just rip that out of context and say, well, fear not. Well, they have very specific promises here. I have a lot more I'm going to skip. So Isaiah 44, 6-8 establishes the unshakable truth that Jehovah alone is God. And he alone directs the course of history, past, present, and future. The exiled people of Israel are reminded not only of who he is, but who they are, his chosen witnesses, despite their failures. This is a very short, but I think a powerful section, and it serves as both a comfort to their emotional situation and a confrontation to their spiritual temptation. It's a declaration of truth against emotional upheaval and spiritual distortion by a polytheistic system. And that's Isaiah 44, 6-8. Some good stuff there. Now, there's a lot more I could say, but we're top of the hour, so I'll stop. All right. Thanks for listening. I'll get this uploaded. The plan, I think, is to try to do one more. I think that's the plan. We'll see how it's going. And we'll see. For anyone in the church, if you're not going to be around for the next hour, just let me know so that I can make the best decision for the next hour. But I think the goal is to try to knock out the next section of Isaiah 44. All right, thanks for listening. And we'll be back hopefully in next, well, it'll be a little bit because I'm going to go ahead and upload this one. All right, thanks for listening. God bless.